God damn you fucking know. You passive fucking scumbag motherfucker thing. Kurwa, no.
were just a Mann Act, they never would have prosecuted him. They prosecuted him on racketeering and on sex trafficking, and they lost. But I think the judge will close the book on him on this because that's all they got him on, and he's been convicted as soap operas during this trial that the judge said he did, but they found him guilty on.
Said were three very obvious instances of sex trafficking because they did not have to find that it was the hundreds of times that Cassie Ventura had testified that she engaged in these freak-offs. So prosecutors pointed to these three. That testimony aligned exactly to that, what the jury wanted to hear. So here's where the defense clearly broke that chain, because what needed to happen was that the jury believes that the commercial sex acts, so those freak-offs, that Cassie Ventura engaged in them because of that violence, because of the force that Combs was exerting, because of extortion about releasing these videos. But what the defense argued was there were lots of other reasons. There was jealousy in the relationship. Yes, there was violence, but it related to these personal romantic relationships that he had with both Cassie and Jane. As opposed to being part of this
masterminding of an enterprise.
And you know what's interesting, Laura? So now we opined about why the jury was not on the same page when it came to RICO. We said, was it because they couldn't agree on a predicate crime, or was it because they just couldn't get there with respect to the idea of this criminal enterprise, which has been very amorphous during the course of this case from prosecutors, hasn't really defined what it is or its purpose. And the answer is, it's that. It's either they didn't believe there was a conspiracy or the enterprise existed. And I say that because the Mann Act, these two charges are predicates for RICO. So if they believed that there had been a criminal enterprise,
that would have been enough.
This would have satisfied the predicate crimes.
So that means they didn't satisfy that. Okay, I want to go to Chloe Malas, who's standing by outside of court right now. Chloe, obviously a very emotional scene playing out in court. We don't have cameras in the courtroom, but we do have a team fanned out all over that building that you're looking at right now. Bring us inside the courtroom, if you will, Chloe, about what is happening in there. What is the reaction as this is still playing out and the judge thanking the jury now?
Even though there are two guilty counts for the Mann Act, Laura, the transportation to engage in prostitution, this is a massive victory for Combs's 8-person defense team. Tenny Garagos, the daughter of celebrity attorney Mark Garagos, who is one of the lead attorneys for this criminal case of Combs, she's wiping tears. This is a massive moment because, like you said, sex trafficking had a mandatory 15-year minimum. I mean, the prosecutors, they painted Combs as somebody that without this illegal activity on Combs's behalf. I mean, you have 6 of his children in there. His mother, Janice, who has been inside the courtroom every single day. Diddy is praying. He is doing a prayer, show of his prayer hands to the jury right now. I mean, I sat there in that courtroom almost every single day, and I watched the faces of those jurors, and you could tell that there were several of them that were not buying what the prosecution was putting forth in their arguments. I saw some roll their eyes. I saw some even fall asleep, some clearly not buying what the prosecution was saying in their closing arguments. On the other hand, during Mark Agnifalo's theatrical closing arguments, there was even laughter from some of the jurors. It was a very clear, Missy Maris and I have talked about this at length, that there was dissent when it came to the racketeering. And I think that it is incredibly powerful that this jury some were unpersuadable, that overnight they were able, within just a verdict on the racketeering conspiracy. I mean, again, Combs, who does not have a lengthy criminal record, this is somebody that Mann Act, it's a 10-year mandatory maximum. It's unlikely that he would get that full 10 years. So this is a man that could see a few years behind bars. Again, this is a very emotional day. We are expecting the attorneys to give a press conference. The prosecutors have said that they will be giving a written statement. They will not be speaking today. We also know that the family plans to address his children. They plan to address the public. And we do think that there could be a statement from Combs himself later today. But in a very emotional scene in the courtroom. And I just want to remind everyone that over the last 7 weeks, although there were 34 witnesses that took the stand, Combs' team not calling a single witness. 30 minutes. I want to describe the scene behind me now. You have what I like to call citizen journalists. These are live bloggers, Instagrammers, TikTokers, filming every single day, live streaming what's happening here. There is a massive crowd gathering. There's about 100 people here right now. Some people are wearing free puffy shirts. You've seen that over the last several weeks. And again, Laura, a stunning victory, if you can call it that. But it is, considering that he was facing up to life in prison, for Combs and his legal team this morning.
Yeah, no question. The federal prosecutors are going to be massively disappointed with this verdict, even with those 2 guilty counts. Chloe, thank you. Stand by. I also want to bring in our NBC News legal analyst, Kristen Gibbons-Fedden. Kristen, you have followed this one from the very beginning. I want to just update our viewers about what's going on inside court right now. His defense team, given the acquittals on some of these charges, Kristen, they're asking for him to be released because, remember, he's been behind bars. He was facing such serious crimes, even though he had pled not guilty and maintained his innocence. He was behind bars this whole time, right? He has been in a detention center for months now, and so they're asking for him to be released today, for him to be able to live in Miami at his home. They've said, look, his plane has been sequestered. This is his first conviction. He should be released on appropriate conditions. Kristen, what are the chances he walks today?
I think there is a high likelihood that he walks today. Keep in mind what the jury found, right? The jury did not find him guilty of counts 2 and 4. So they really ripped out the threat element. They ripped out the violence element. They ripped out the violent parts of which is what the prosecution used as the main thing to keep him in bail. Remember back to when they were arguing bail multiple times because the defense asked for reconsideration. And some of the main things that they pointed to was how Diddy was violent, how Diddy kind of utilized his enterprise to enact all of these violence. Well, the jury has spoken. There was no criminal enterprise, or at least they did not find that Puff Daddy or Diddy made any of these crimes possible through his power, through his money, through his control, through his violence. So there is a high likelihood that with his plane sequestered, with him in being Miami, and the fact that he is a celebrity where he can't really go unnoticed, right, there is a high likelihood that the judge may release him on bail today.
Yeah, I mean, they have his passport, but he has an enormous amount of means. And obviously, the prosecution is going to oppose this. They're saying that his attorneys have been trying to downplay this years-long conduct. But, Misty, if you're the judge in this moment right now, do you release him with the sort of hope in the prayer that he's not going to be able to fly out of the country somewhere?
I think it's very likely that he gets released now that he's convicted on these Mann Act charges, and that's it. You're not talking about the sex trafficking, force, fraud, and coercion. You're not talking about RICO, this widespread criminal enterprise. You're talking about 2 isolated Mann Act charges. And the analysis is going to be, number 1, danger to the public. The other is going to be flight risk. So flight risk is what you're speaking of. To the extent that there's enough conditions on him to keep him and have him come back for sentencing, I think it's very likely that he gets released. And when he gets sentenced, this is really important because what's going to happen is the prosecutors are going to present aggravating factors. The defense is going to present mitigating factors.
We should make that clear. That does not happen today. That happens in months from now.
That happens down there. But the fact that sex trafficking is an acquittal, it's going to be really important because that idea of who's exploited in these Mann Act charges, that Cassie Ventura or Jane were potentially exploited, that would be the prosecution's argument. I think you're going to lose a lot of that argument. So the judge is going to be looking at that possible penalty and likely saying that he will be released with those conditions. And one more point on that sex trafficking. I think the defense made a very good point, which the really had to concede. And when we say it's easier to convict if it's only sex trafficking at least one time, it's also a concession to a certain degree, because when do you decide it's sex trafficking versus not sex trafficking? And a lot of people have this idea of what that is, right? That it's something more than just one isolated incident, that it's more of a large scale operation. And I'm wondering if that undercut the prosecution's
I think people
case.
also think of it as something that not for the benefit of the person themselves,
Correct.
right? They think about people selling girls. They think about some international operation, people in the back of a van. People have an image of sex trafficking that doesn't necessarily correlate with what the law says about sex trafficking, but I wonder if it played into the jury's view of what was going on here, because the defense kept hammering, look, he might be a flawed guy. He might be violent. He might be an abuser, but he's not a trafficker. He's not part of an enterprise.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Even to the extent that Mark Agnifilo in his closing referenced Sammy the Bull. It's like they wanted the jury to go home and rent Goodfellas so that they could see what a criminal enterprise was. And I agree with you. I think that just in the jury's mind, and the average person, you're going to think of a more widespread scheme where there's a lot of exploitation of women being coerced to come into a sex trafficking ring. That's not what this was. So clearly the defense did a good job undercutting it. And Laura, also, defense strategy of not calling any witnesses, people have said, was that good or that bad?
A lot of people wondered, is that a concession that he doesn't have a strong case? And now look what happened.
Well, it's a risk-averse strategy, in my view, because once you start putting on witnesses, you open up doors. And the defense did a very good job on cross-examination of using electronic record, text messages, emails. So you can't really wiggle out of them. They're in black and white. So if the jury reads those as being romantic relationships, consenting relationships, whatever that might be, you know, when with respect to forced labor, that there were relationships between him and his employees that didn't rise to that level of force and coercion, that's really effective because that goes back in time to when it's happening. It's not what you're thinking in retrospect from the stand.
Just to bring everyone inside the courtroom again, no cameras in federal court, but we have a crackerjack team inside there that is sort of feeding us through the Pony Express of notes here, fighting desperately right now to keep him behind bars, saying things like he poses a danger, he's going to attempt to flee justice, basically saying, Misty, he can't be trusted because of the misconduct, because of the physical abuse. He doesn't have a respect for the law. This is, again, the Comey, the prosecutor, trying to convince the judge to keep him behind bars. And the judge is pressing her, saying, counsel, do you have an example of somebody who has been behind bars in detention on this type of charge, this Prostitution Mann Act charge, and bail was denied on those grounds? And she said, I don't have an example off the top of my head, Judge. And it sounds like he's gonna make her, press her to try to find some precedent, if you will, because the judge has to be careful too, right? He can't keep him in detention if there's not a legal justification for it.
Absolutely. The judge relies on legal precedent. Is there another similar case in this jurisdiction where that's happened? I am not aware of one. I think prosecution's argument about that danger element is much weaker given what the jury has said. The jury has spoken. These acquittals, they are rock solid on those particular charges at this point. The stronger argument, in my view, from prosecution perspective, is the tremendous amount of resources that this individual has on that flight risk issue. I think it's a stretch to say, given the jury's verdict, that this is a danger to society because the jury has made this determination on these charges. And again, unless there's a case out there that I'm not aware of, I practice in this jurisdiction. I don't think there is on these.
You've never
charges.
seen that before in your practice?
No. And by the way, Laura, he's a first-time offender. You know, we know a lot about him because he's in the public eye for past 20 years, but he's a first-time offender from a legal perspective, and that has an impact on this decision as well.
Okay, I want to bring in our entertainment correspondent, Chloe Malas, who has been in court throughout this trial. And again, just to set the table for folks who might just be joining us, Combs has been acquitted on a variety of the different charges here, including racketeering and including sex trafficking using force. But he has been found guilty on essentially prostitution, transporting women and different escorts across state lines. Chloe, it sounds like they're wrapping up there in court.
It does, but it doesn't. So here's what's going on right now. Let me take you inside the courtroom. The judge has asked both the prosecutors and Combs' attorneys to submit letters to him by 1 o'clock. He said, we're going to be here all day. He even said, Combs, you don't want to go back to MDC? Of course he doesn't want to go back to the Metropolitan Detention Center, which is rife with issues. He's been there for 9 months. And like you and Missy were just talking about, these are the lower hanging fruit charges. This is a man that was denied bail. Maureen Comey and prosecutors saying that Combs was violent, a danger to society, that he would obstruct justice by witness tampering if he were to be released sometime before this trial. But let me point out, as part of the RICO conspiracy charge, Laura, there were among them witness tampering, among them obstruction of justice, and the jurors found that those elements were not proved, and that is why they have found him not guilty on RICO. Like Misty said, there is a strong chance that we could potentially see Combs walk out those doors behind me. We know that his legal team is going to be giving a press conference today. We were also expecting to hear from Douglas Wigdor, Cassie Ventura's attorney, who has been a presence throughout this trial. Again, this is significant when it comes to the sex trafficking. Cassie Ventura giving emotional testimony for 4 days, saying that Combs threatened her with blackmail, videos of these freak-offs if she did not taken it. But there were text messages, which we have talked about over the last nearly 2 months, that were damning for the prosecution and that Diddy's team used as their defense through cross-examination. Remember, they did not call any witnesses. What they did is they said the proof is in the writing. Here you go. You have Cassie Ventura and Jane on multiple occasions consenting, it appears, to these freak-offs, even going so far as to set up some of these freak-offs on their own accord. And let me just remind everyone that this all started in November of 2023 when Cassie Ventura filed an explosive civil suit against Combs, accusing him of sex trafficking and years of physical and emotional abuse. She filed the suit after she went to him saying, I'm going to write a book. Pay me millions of dollars, and if you don't, I am going to sue you. And then, essentially, as paraphrasing, Douglas Wigdor filed that civil suit. They settled the following day in less than 24 hours, and it came out in the trial that she received $20 million from Combs and another $10 million from the Intercontinental Hotel. I'm just getting a note here from our producer, Candace Quo. The family is now clapping in the courtroom. As a reminder, there is his mother, 6 of his children in the courtroom, and Combs, he is now praying on his knees. This is an incredibly emotional moment. And as a reminder, there are no cameras in the courtroom. There will be court sketches. His children were very emotional this morning. I actually walked up inside the courthouse with them, up in the elevators, and his daughters were wearing all black. And I actually spoke to one of the mothers of one of his daughters, Chance. I won't tell you what she said, but I can tell you that it was very emotional. Again, although convicted on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, it is a massive win for Combs' legal team and a huge blow for New York prosecutors that said that Combs ran a criminal enterprise. Also, Laura, those co-conspirators, none of them testifying. Christina Quorum, heads of security like D-Rock. We heard about all these different names of these individuals that supposedly ran this criminal organization, but none of them appear to have been given immunity. We don't know that for sure, but none of them testified during this trial. And there were thoughts that perhaps if convicted on racketeering, that prosecutors were going to go after said enterprise. But again, I just want to reiterate that Combs' family clapping moments ago and Combs praying on his knees. Laura?
Chloe, since you followed this so closely and you were in the courtrooms for so many weeks covering this, can you just remind our viewers about the defense team's strategy here? Because I know you and I talked at various points about whether it was going to backfire. And you look at that screen and you see all those not guilty verdicts, all those acquittals on some of the most serious charges of using force and using coercion. And they heard so much evidence about all of the drugs and all of the threats and Combs telling that these women, I'm going to release these tapes if you don't do what I want. And yet the jury did not think it enough. What was the theory, Chloe, that the defense used in terms of why he should be acquitted here? Because I remember in closing arguments, they were saying things like this was a modern day love story. And we wondered if that was going to backfire.
Sure. I mean, look, that is certainly a point that myself and others, they lost us there, because no great modern love story consists of repeated domestic violence, okay? And Combs' team owned up to the fact that he is a bad guy. He is an abuser of women. He is a drug addict. This is not vindication that Combs has left. What this is Combs and the dream team. There are 8 attorneys. This is a multi-million-dollar defense team. You have Mark Agnifilo, Combs' lead attorney, who is also representing Luigi Mangione. You have Tenny Garagos, the daughter of celebrity attorney Mark Garagos. You also have Brian Steele, who joined late in the game out of Atlanta, Georgia, who just recently had a big win representing Young Thug in his RICO case down there in Georgia. And you got to understand that there are 8 attorneys there, right? For viewers at home, that if Combs wanted to testify in his own defense, that if they wanted to call any witnesses for the money that he was paying, I watched him pass notes for the entire 2 months. He was very involved in his defense. We know that his attorneys, many of them visiting him every single day in the 9 months leading up to this trial at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, that this was a strategy to try to show a united force, that prosecutors did not meet their burden of proof. NBC's Danny Ceballos has said multiple times on our air that if they don't feel as though the prosecutors proved their case, why put on a defense? This is a common strategy for defense attorneys. It's also common to not put your client on the stand and potentially incriminate themselves. And so what you're seeing is that these were attorneys that were confident. And we are looking right now at the courthouse right now, hoping that perhaps the family or even some of the attorneys are going to come out. More likely, Laura, the family will be coming out, because those lawyers for Combs, they have a letter that is due in about 2 hours to the judge explaining why Combs should be released. They have said that they will put up a $1 million bond. They have said, take his plane. We don't have his plane. We've already put his houses up, his mansion in Star Island. We've put that up for collateral. That this is low-hanging fruit, transportation to engage in prostitution. Still illegal, a 10-year mandatory maximum prison sentence. But again, unlikely that he would serve that full amount of time. I mean, again, there were also, assumptions that perhaps Combs was going to go to President Donald Trump for a pardon if he was convicted across the board here. And you even heard President Trump speaking at one point that he was open to looking at the facts, but that he didn't know enough. We don't know what sort of options that this team is weighing, but we know that this legal team, and I can tell you firsthand, they have been buttoned up. They are very reticent to speak to the media. That is the last thing on their minds right now. They have been very, very focused on trying to get Combs out of prison and to find him some sort of vindication. And today, again, I can't say it enough, after sitting in that trial, Laura, for nearly 2 months, a massive blow to Cassie Ventura, to Jane, to the employees who testified, to Mia, one of his former assistants who testified under a pseudonym, and to those prosecutors who told those jurors multiple times that Combs is a criminal, that he should be behind bars for the rest of his life because he was running a criminal enterprise. But that was not proven today.
Chloe, stand by. We're going to come back to you soon. I want to bring back in here NBC News legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden. Kristen, you and I have talked before. Why was this a federal case, right? If there is evidence of violence, if there is evidence of force, we have the video of the intercontinental beating back in 2016. Why was this not a state case instead of a federal case, right? You think about a federal case, something that affects international commerce, right?
But again, I think it all comes down to the fact that the federal prosecutors really wanted to put forth this RICO charge. We saw the RICO charge using a non-mob element in the R. Kelly case. Unfortunately, it was not used as successfully here. And I think what the bottom line here is the jury saw Cassie and Jane as girlfriends, as a domestic element here. They did not see that that his crimes were made possible because of his power, because of his money or control over that enterprise. And so to your point, the state interest, I think, would absolutely have been served. As a former state prosecutor, I can tell you we prosecuted cases where obviously we did not indict on federal charges because we could only indict on state charges, but where the underlying misconduct was the same, and we were successful in doing that.
You know, so many people remember your coverage with the Bill Cosby case, and there are obviously many, many differences with that case compared to this. But Kristen, I do wonder, even in 2025, if jurors still have a hard time getting their head around why women stay in situations violent, which are coercive, and keep coming back. Remember, in this case, there were a variety of different times where Cassie and Combs broke up, and then she went back. Do you think that even in this day and age, people still have a hard time getting their heads around that?
I can tell you, just being even though I'm a former prosecutor, I do civil litigation. I represent sex abuse survivors as well as survivors of intimate partner violence every single day. And I can tell you, jurors still have a really hard time around it. In this particular trial, just like in the Cosby trial, we did have an expert to talk about the dynamics of sexual abuse, the dynamics of intimate partner violence, and really specifically that cycle of violence where it is really the norm, not the exception, that individuals remain in contact with their abusers, where individuals may remain in a relationship with their abusers, where there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. You know, I think even today after Me Too, and even after significant victories in various trials, including Weinstein, including R. Kelly, and many others, people still want survivors to be wrapped up in this beautiful box. And what I mean by that, Laura, is that if they are abused once, not multiple times, but once, they immediately go to the police. They immediately either go to the hospital if necessary. They have pictures of their bruises. There's a DNA test, etc. And the police are called immediately. There's a conviction. But that is not the norm. That is not the norm. There's a lot of cognitive dissonance. There's a lot of humiliation. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of embarrassment amongst these crimes. And as we saw in Cassie, as we saw in Jane, there also is a tie to an individual's livelihood. You know, it's easy for many people to say, hey, I would never stay in that relationship. But what about those circumstances where that relationship, the person who is abusing you is responsible for your children getting fed, for various things that a lot of people put to the side? We don't know what anyone come up with, you know, a level playing field. One other thing I think that is important to mention here is that, yes, this is a significant victory for the defense, but in no way, we all, you know, obviously there were no cameras in the courtroom, but we all saw through reports Cassie's very emotional testimony. Same with Jane. Just because he was found not guilty on counts 2 and on counts 4, make no mistake, there was no consent. These women believed there was force. These women believed there was coercion. And so I think while this is a significant victory in terms of the charges and the potential sentence and the potential penalties, you know, Diddy is going to have to face certain business and reputational fallout, notwithstanding the civil suits, which has a lesser burden as well.
I want to also bring in Misty, who's still with me at the table here. Misty, for folks at home who are looking at this, and maybe they followed it sort of loosely, but there was sort of within the general sort of just discussion about this case, whether or not prosecutors had overcharged. And prosecutors obviously had many reasons that they felt like the evidence supported all of these charges. They thought that they had evidence of a criminal conspiracy. They thought they had evidence of a criminal enterprise. They thought they had evidence of kidnapping, arson, and yet the jury did not convict. If you're just looking at this at home, are you thinking they made a bad bet?
Yeah, I think especially with respect to the RICO, in my mind, I was always waiting for that charge to really formulate and the prosecutor's argument to really formulate on the criminal enterprise. And I think some areas where there were a lot of vulnerabilities with respect to that charge, not just the predicate crimes, but there has to be a conspiracy to engage in a criminal enterprise. And prosecutors had to say it's different co-conspirators throughout this 20-year period, right? So that makes it a bit more difficult to wrap your mind around. And so with RICO, I always felt it was a stretch. But with sex trafficking, it becomes federal because of that force, fraud, and coercion element, an impact on interstate commerce. I think those charges truly could have gone either way. That 2016 video at the Intercontinental is so difficult to watch. And the prosecutor's argument is that that was happening during a freak-off, that she's being dragged back into the room. Clearly, the jury did not find that. They thought this was more about romantic partner violence, which is just different than sex trafficking.
It doesn't mean it's not a crime.
It
it's
doesn't
just
mean
not
it's not a crime. I mean,
Yeah.
it is. There are crimes galore here, Laura, when it comes to abuse, domestic violence, assault. All of those, I think, would have been easy had they not been barred by statute of limitations. The federal law allows for conduct that would normally be barred to come into a trial. It has a much longer period of time that prosecutors can look back and bring into the courtroom. So look, the defense stood up and they said that this was really about tumultuous relationships. And I think where prosecutors maybe had something happen that was outside of their control. So there were two romantic partners who were the basis for these counts, Cassie Ventura and Jane. Those are the two sex trafficking. There was supposed to be a third victim who was supposed to testify, who ultimately refused to. Would the jury have thought differently if there was another individual that maybe wasn't engaged in a romantic
Or other people who had
relationship?
maybe flipped, maybe people on the inside, right? We didn't see sort of this parade of people who said, yeah, I worked for him for years and I saw everything firsthand.
No, we saw a lot of people who talked about violence in the workplace and observing, and then ultimately on cross-examination in many instances said, this was one of the best jobs. It was my dream job. No, I actually hold him in high regard. So it kind of undercuts some of those arguments. And the true co-conspirators that prosecutors brought in their story and their testimony, not by putting them on the stand. They brought it in through text messages. They brought it in through emails. And that is different than a co-conspirator sitting on the stand and saying, this is what we agreed to. And this is how we enacted this plan of criminality. And this is what we did, conspired to engage in this conduct. It's very different and it's difficult. And I thought this with the RICO charge in general, when those witnesses did not come on. I thought the chief of staff, Christina Karam, KK, I thought she would be the closer for prosecution, quite frankly.
Because she saw everything, according to prosecutors.
And she was there for the longest period of time. I do think that was to the prosecution's detriment from the perspective of proving that charge. And clearly the jury agreed.
All right, for more, let's bring in executive music editor for Variety, Jem Oswald. I just wonder in a case like this, thanks for joining us, Jem. I wonder in a case like this, now that he has been convicted of these two counts as it relates to prostitution, as it relates to Cassie and Jane, the pseudonym there, what reputational damage is he going to experience for this? You know, we had the criminal case, which has been decided today. There were also just dozens upon dozens of civil suits that had been filed, Jem. And you wonder if he is going to see some repercussions from this fallout, even though he has been acquitted.
There will be some, but I don't think there's going to be a lot at all. People still work with Kanye West. People don't work with R. Kelly anymore. But the fact that he was only convicted of the least serious charges, not saying that they're not serious, that says a lot. And there was a shooting incident that he was involved in 1999 or 2000. He basically got away with that. There was an assault in 1999 that was settled out of court. None of those things really hurt him. And this is more severe, certainly, but I think his business is going to keep going. People will still work with him. And as the trial showed, people are still afraid of him.
You also wonder if it's also just the fact that so much time has passed, right, Jem? It's not 1999. If this trial had happened when he was sort of at the height of where he was at the industry, and that's not to diminish, obviously, his influence and his vast wealth, but we're just seeing some of his family members walking out of court now, his sons, other family members now trickling out. You see his other relatives coming out here. We'll wait to see if his lawyers speak. But, Jem, I just wonder if this had been happening in the late 90s, it would be a different story.
Yes, it probably would. There was the change of the culture in society. The culture and society have changed, and hip hop has become much more accepted. I'm not going to say this kind of behavior has become much more accepted, because without R. Kelly, there wouldn't have been this kind of trial or trying to get him on racketeering charges and all that. But I mean, you just saw the way that his family looks. They're not concerned.
Well, certainly he was facing life behind bars, and as his defense attorney said, he would be a fool to do anything that would put his custody in jeopardy now, as he hopes to stay out of prison. And we should find out later today whether, in fact, the judge is going to release him, given that he has been acquitted of some of the most serious charges. You know, Jem, just briefly again, while I have you, I also wonder if, you know, some of it also in terms of what the larger culture makes of a situation like this. When you see those not guilty verdicts on the racketeering and on the sex trafficking, whether it plays into sort of, you know, larger discussions of people feeling like black men in America have been wrongly persecuted and prosecuted for things that others would not be charged for.
I think that's a fair statement, especially at a time when we've seen an awful lot of other people who have been convicted of felonies basically get away with it.
All right, Jem, I appreciate your coverage. I appreciate you joining us on a day like this. Missy's still here with me at the table. You know, you see the crush of reporters out there right now. His family, obviously, breathing an enormous sigh of relief. Talk to me sort of about sentencing here, because as we mentioned, it's not going to be today. The judge is going to decide, I think later today, it's probably fair to say the judge is going to decide whether he gets to stay in custody. But say he is released, he's going to have to come back in a couple of months. They're both sides are going to trade papers about what they think an appropriate sentence would be.
Yes, both sides are going to talk about in documents they're going to submit to the court. They're going to say what an appropriate sentence should be. I suspect Diddy's team is going to say there should be no more jail time, at the very most time served. Prosecutors are going to try and argue for something closer to that maximum. And then there's another part of the process where an outside entity will do a review. This would be a probation department will do a review and make a determination about that and what their recommendation is, and that will be based on many different factors, including other similar cases for a first-time conviction on this type of charge. So there's going to be a lot of looking at the federal guidelines as far as what this sentence would be appropriate. And the judge is really limited in those sentencing guidelines. There's discretion up to that 10 years, but they're going to use those guidelines in order to really pin down what would be appropriate under the circumstances. And just looking at this scene outside of court, Laura, this is what it's been like every day, but it seems to be even more so now. Obviously, a lot of interest in this case, but that sentencing, that is going to be something that truly we will hear on both sides, mitigating and aggravating factors, mitigating from the defense, aggravating from the prosecution. And it's a question mark about what actually the prosecutors are going to be able to talk about given the acquittal on some of these other charges.
But they're also going to take into account, the judge is going to take into account his behavior while behind bars for the past couple months.
Behavior while behind bars, behavior to the extent that there's going to be a period of time in between, whether or not he follows all of the conditions that are attached. All of that is going to be taken into consideration.
So just to recap here, music mogul Sean Diddy Combs has been found not guilty on 3 of the most serious charges he was facing in this trial, but he has been found guilty on 2 counts related to transportation to engage in prostitution. Court is now adjourned until 1 p.m. Eastern, when the judge will consider the defense request to release Combs today. That concludes this NBC News special report. We're going to have much more ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now, and online at NBCNews.com. I'm Laura Jarrett. Thanks for watching. All right, we are continuing our breaking news coverage right now here on NBC News Now with a partial guilty verdict in the case of Sean Diddy Combs. A jury there in New York finding Combs guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. I want to go to the attorney right there in court speaking right now and listen in.
I'm held responsible in this entire life, and she's happy that in November of 2023 she came forward and shined a light on this and brought other people forward who have various civil claims, and so we'll see what happens with the sentencing. All right,
Counsel,
thank you very much.
Looking at the director, you say that same thing. Sorry.
Oh, I can't repeat it again, but
yeah, please.
Sorry. So, what was the question?
Your reaction to what happened.
The reaction is that we're pleased that he's finally been held responsible for 2 federal crimes, something that he's never faced in his life. He still faces substantial jail time. Of course, we would have liked to have seen a conviction on the sex crimes in RICO, but we understand beyond a reasonable doubt is a high standard, and we're just pleased that that he still faces substantial jail time. All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
How much time?
Doug Wigdor, W-I-G-D-O-R. Well, each is faces up to 10 years on each. I'm not sure what the sentencing guidelines are given the various different things, but I'll leave that up to the government and the defense to argue. But I feel confident in saying he still faces substantial incarceration.
How will you feel if he walks out on bail?
Well, that's up to the judge. I don't have a personal vested interest in this case. Whatever the appropriate thing to do under the law is what should be done. And at the end of the day, he needs to be sentenced pursuant to the guidelines and pursuant to what the law is. My understanding of that is that he faces significant incarceration. So thank you very much.
Thank you. You've just been listening there to Douglas Wigdor. That is the civil attorney for Cassie Ventura. Obviously, one of Combs's former girlfriends who figured prominently in this trial. He said that he's pleased that Combs has finally been held responsible. He talked about the substantial jail time that Combs is now facing, having been convicted of those 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution as it relates to his client, Cassie Ventura, as well as another woman, another former girlfriend under the pseudonym Jane. Misty, I wonder what
you.